Great. Hello, everybody. We're going to get started with the Trusted Content panel. I'm Tom Smith. I'm co-founder and CEO of Gado Images. We're an AI-driven editorial agency based in San Francisco. And for almost a decade now, we've worked with archives, collectors, and individual photographers, primarily in the editorial sector of our industry. And in that time, we've seen broad changes in the market for editorial content, as well as in the kinds of content available and the needs of editorial image buyers. Today's panel focuses on trusted content. Our goal is to explore the editorial media licensing sector from multiple perspectives: large agencies, independent newswires, buyers, and new media content producers. We're interested in changes in the editorial space, like the explosion of user-generated content, as well as best practices for verifying content and establishing trust with buyers. But beyond that, we're also focusing on how the editorial space is relevant to other sectors of the industry. With commercial buyers increasingly demanding authentic, verified content, the journalistic processes and buyer needs of the editorial space are increasingly relevant to all sectors of our industry. Best practices from editorial can inform your company's process, whether you're working with news content or archives, or are in the commercial or creative space. So I'm going to get started by introducing Bob Ahern. Bob is here from Getty Images. He's the director of Getty Images Archive, and he's been with the company for more than 20 years. Bob drives strategy for Getty's archive of tens of millions of images, and also manages more than 700 contributing archive photographers and multiple image partners. And I'll hand it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. So I want to just briefly run through where we're at as a company for archive. We've been around in one guise or another for about 150 years, so we're not new to it. So in terms of sort of trust and everything else, we're building on a good platform. For those of you who don't know too much about Getty Images Archive, very quickly, we are the custodians of the world's largest privately owned commercial archive. And what that means for us is we oversee a lot of analog. We oversee a lot of the old stuff. And that's in facilities around the world, whether that's in London, the Bettman Archive in Pittsburgh, or the Sigma Archives in Paris. And they actually come with a team of expertise. We have about 20 people looking after those collections. So aside from making us quite unique in the industry, I think what that does is bring a level of expertise to those collections. So we have editors, researchers, metadata people, scanning operators. We still have a wet darkroom, would you believe, producing lovely, beautiful prints. But what it means is we're able to bring some expertise and trust and guidance through those collections. We bring a lot of this to the market. What do we do with 150 million images? That's what essentially we have. What does it mean to have those kind of size collections, and what kind of challenge is that really? And for us, it means we need to get more content into the marketplace. Essentially, our archive never stands still, and this is just a few snaps of some of the files from archive. So why do we continue to expand our offer, which is what we're doing? We're constantly putting new content into the marketplace. But why would we bother all that lift? We go back to our files, we scan, we digitize, we add metadata. It costs money, it costs effort, it costs time. But essentially, these are the key drivers internally and externally that we're grappling with and hopefully achieving. We all know there's more customers, more platforms, and more territories to be in. The long tail of customers is essentially driving our need to put more content into the marketplace. But to be clear, it's very, very highly targeted content. We're not scanning here A to Z and just throwing pictures into the marketplace hoping that someone buys them. It's a very, very structured and carefully curated edit about how we go in, because that lift is expensive. We want to make sure we're balancing the needs of what we can afford with what our customers are going to pay for. A fraction of what we actually hold is actually online. I mean, we have a pretty good presence in the marketplace. We have about 11 million historical images, and by historical we mean anything sort of pre-2000. And this graph tells you a little bit, pretty clear picture of the exponential rise from about 10 or 11 years ago, about how the amount of content we're putting into the marketplace is going up. What this doesn't show is our revenue has actually doubled for archive over the last 7 years, and given we've been around for about 150, that's actually quite a compressed time frame to make that leap. So in terms of what we edit and what goes through our hands and what we digitize, we also work with very, very trusted partners, cultural institutions, media partners. That could be the ICP in New York. It could be historical societies around the world. It could be the RGS in London. Again, it's about partnering with trusted content. The same goes for photographers. We have about 700 to 1,000 photographers. And again, some of those names, they've been around a long time. This isn't an insurance necessarily, but it's good best practice to be working with people that have had their content out there for a very, very long time. And we were very excited, actually, last week to announce Irving Penn was joining the ranks of Getty Images. Anyway. So future-proofing, another reason why we go back to our files and think about new content and putting new content into the marketplace is future-proofing our archive. And this is a really interesting one for us. People assume that I spend all day long with my heads in the historical clouds thinking about the past, and it's true, we do. We do a lot of that kind of stuff. We also spend a lot of time thinking about the future and what are our customers going to be buying, not in 6 months' time, but in 5 years, in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So when we look at the demographic of who is purchasing, when we look at the shape of our archive, are we going to be fit for purpose in 20 years? And this was a really interesting graph for me. The orange base here is a rough shape of our content at Getty Images through the 20th century by decade. The blue line is actually where our customers are purchasing. And we can see that they're digging right into the 60s and 70s still. So that tells us a bit about what kind of people are purchasing, what they're interested in. But really it also tells us it's a lot of customers telling the same stories again in a different way. And again, they want to see new content. They know what Marilyn Monroe looks like. They know what JFK looks like. But they want to tell that story differently over and over again. And again, a really interesting one, the cultural reappraisal of archives, like any body of work. I think those questions come and they're long overdue about where do your archives come from, what is the bias. Our two pillars, I guess, of our archive are Picture Post magazine and Life magazine. They come from a particular part of the world and were shot by particular people. And are we fit for purpose for now, for our customers? Are we thinking about where our archives come from, how should they go? It gives us a chance to go back and maybe pull out narratives that we weren't looking at maybe 10, 20 years ago, whether that's LGBTQT, whether that's Black Lives Matter, whether that's the Me Too movement. This is customers telling us they want this content. This isn't PR puff. This is absolutely what customers say. And they're saying we don't have enough of it. So there's every reason to go back and re-explore our archives and actually see what we have. And very lastly, preserving the object, we do have an obligation to care for our content, and we will make non-commercial decisions to intervene in historical content that actually would just simply disappear if we didn't intervene, and that's part of our curatorial and conservation strategy. But essentially, history doesn't stand still, and hopefully nor do we.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I love the idea that an archive is a resource you can reach into to find new content over time as society changes and the needs of buyers change too. I think that's a great thing for people to look at who are building collections today, that the collections you build today are archives 40 years down the line, and to think about what that means for the long-term kind of business of your company. So thank you, Bob. I'm going to lead in next to Jonathan Wells. Jonathan Wells is President and Bureau Chief of Cipa USA, an international photo agency with more than 35 partners worldwide. Before Cipa, Jonathan was a news photo editor at the Associated Press, giving him a broad perspective on the news side of the editorial space. Thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, what number is your?
5.
Sorry.
Let's just see if we get the slides going here. There we go. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Jonathan Wells, and I'm CEO and President of Cipa USA. Just going to run some photos, get a better idea of what we do as I describe a little bit about our company. Our Cipa USA was founded in 1986 by the French photo agency Cipa. I've been at the company nearly 20 years, and although we've been around for a long time, our company itself is 100% digital, and unfortunately we don't have a huge archive. Our archive only goes back about 10 years, but we are all digital. We have no physical archives at all. And so there's some advantages and disadvantages to that, particularly with respect to some of the legal issues that were discussed earlier. So our archive, we like to think that it's a pretty clean archive. We have all good contracts, and pretty sure that we have a good understanding of all the rights that we need to be in the marketplace. We have some staff photographers as well as contributors, both in the US and around the world. And as Tom mentioned, we have about 35 partners around the world, both as a sales partner and as a contributing partner to content. And then on terms of what we produce, we have a lot of our wholly owned content. We're trying to do more and more wholly owned content, so we have absolute control of the rights. We cover mainly entertainment subjects here in LA and New York. We have a photographer who is part of the White House pool, covers a lot of politics. We do some big sports events, news, economics, business features, et cetera. So we have pretty much general kind of news coverage here in the States, and we rely on partners and contributors overseas to provide us with other content. And together, we're able to put together a pretty good offering that while we can't compete with some of our bigger competitors, we do offer pretty good second service, I think, to customers. We're looking for maybe a little bit of an alternative to some of the bigger, more traditional wire services. And I think one of our advantages and benefits is that we sort of apply old-fashioned journalistic news gathering techniques and best practices together with just modern digital technology and the way pictures need to be collected today and distributed. We're essentially as Tom mentioned, a traditional independent wire service company providing daily coverage for our customers. And it's really a bit of an old-fashioned business maybe. We're not giving away free drones. We're not giving away free camera equipment. We basically ask our staff and our contributors to create the content. Some of it's wholly owned, some of it's by contributor. We license those photos, we report those sales, and we pay the photographer. It's a pretty simple business. I'm not sure it's necessarily, is it the best? I'm not sure, but it's what we do, and we try to do it pretty well. It's pretty simple. We respect the copyright. We try to offer fair price, good quality photography. We report those sales back to the content provider. And unfortunately today we sell, I don't know about unfortunately, but actually we're lucky. We sell a lot of photos for a lot less money, but that's sort of how we've been able to kind of keep up with things. It's the same principles that we did 30 or 40 years ago. Unfortunately, the price per picture has gone down a lot, but essentially one license, one fee. Either that's shared with the partner or that's 100% revenue back to the company. And that's kind of, that's sort of our company in a nutshell. We have an office in New York that directs the assignments, again, mainly in the US. Los Angeles, we try to cover the big entertainment events of the day in New York. Washington, and then if there's some other big events around the country and around the world, we try to assign photographers to do that as well. Some photographers prefer to do a revenue share model. They're very happy with that. They'd rather own the copyright, and other photographers, and it seems to be more younger photographers, I would say, are entering the business, prefer just a flat assignment fee where we own the rights, and they're just guaranteed the revenue per assignment. And we try to be flexible with both our partners and our customers because, again, we're a lot smaller than some of our competitors. We have to be flexible. We try to do that with good pricing and good service. And also, we're very, very careful because this panel is about trusted content. You will see a few photos in the presentation that some of our customers did question the authenticity of those photos. And so we take that very, very seriously. In my 17 or 18 years at Cipa, we've had no real serious issues in terms of the authenticity or what we claim to be in the photo is not in the photo. But we did have one recently where a customer did question whether the photo was accurate as depicted. And it turns out that the photo was manipulated slightly. And I think that's a hard question. I'm not sure the answer to that. You know, back in the days when I did work with digital wet photography, where you would, you know, have a group shot of 4 and you crop out one person, that necessarily wasn't considered manipulation. Often we take 2 pictures out of a group of 4. People wouldn't really complain about that. Is that manipulating the photo? I'm not sure. I mean, it could dramatically alter the meaning of the photo. I think today, in today's world of politics, if perhaps the person at the sitting at Pennsylvania Avenue was in a photo and you cropped out someone who shouldn't be with them, it probably changes but if it's done analog in a darkroom, a lot of people wouldn't sort of claim that to be manipulation, but now, quote unquote, if you Photoshop something, you do have a lot of issues with that. But anyway, we try to be very, very careful with that. We have, thanks to Nancy's help, we have a pretty good, contract where we ask, of course, the photographer and the partner to testify that everything is accurate in the photos, that they own the photos, that they have the right to enter into the license agreement. For us, that's most important because that's going to flow down to users of photography, and they need to be sure that what we're representing to them is what we say it is. So we're very, very careful about that. And like I said, we've had very few issues. You know, if it looks like a duck and smells like a duck, it's usually a duck, and that's basically the basic test with most of our photos. And you'll see towards the end there were a few pictures that people did question. And with that, I guess I'll wrap things up. We have about a few more photos here. And that's it. And welcome to any questions later on.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I love the diversity of what you're seeing there with politics, sports, culture, just so much captured there. So yeah, thank you. So now we'll go on to Eileen Flanagan. Eileen is Manager of Photo Research and Licensing for Warner Media. She provides photo research and licensing for all divisions of Turner Broadcasting, including TNT, TBS, Cartoon Network, CNN, HLN, and Turner Sports. As an image buyer, I think Eileen has probably licensed materials from many of the people in the room here, and I think she can share a really valuable buyer's perspective on the editorial market. So I'll turn it over to Eileen.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I see some faces out there that I've known for too long. I've been in the business for 30 years now, and that's scary. Dealing with the type of material that's in the Halton Archive and Bettman Archive, trafficking black and white prints and slides, etc., to digitization and to prices lower than most photographers would like them sold at. So I was at the Chicago Historical Society. I was with Corbis, Getty, Magnum. I got a job at Turner Broadcasting in 2012, and I've been there since. There's been quite a bit of change, and especially in the past, I'd say 6 months. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the fact that Time Warner was purchased by AT&T. So we are now part of a 250,000 employee company. I think we're the second largest advertiser in the world. And you'd be amazed at where all of this photography comes from for a variety of uses. We have many brands, many brands. That's what we are now. In the last couple of weeks, we have officially rebranded to Warner Media, and it consists of these brands. So it includes HBO, Warner Brothers, DC Comics, Bleacher Report, etc. All of this is available for you to memorize at the warnermediagroup.com website. They've broken up the businesses into 4 divisions. One has to do with entertainment. The other is CNN, HLN, and Turner Sports and Bleacher Report are now separate business, so that's all basically live broadcasting. And then Warner Brothers has taken over the Turner Classic Movies brand, as well as the children's programming from Cartoon Network and adolescent to immature adult content for Adult Swim. It's also Warner Brothers Television, and then Otter, which I think is like anime and games. It's been very hard to kind of keep up on all of this. Some brands have been dropped in the past 6 months. We were allowed to finally integrate after the Justice Department lost their suit against us and in court and appellate court. So we are full guns ahead. Right now it's unsure as to how things are going to wrap up or how they're going to turn out. I would imagine that they're going to be evolving as the market evolves or trying to anticipate what the market does. When I was working with the agencies, it was very difficult to navigate the morass that is a media company. It is basically we have these various needs, most of which is assigned photography. So we produce a lot of our own photography, and that's for programming as well as corporate events, brand events, etc. I work for a department called Brand Experience. It's been named 3 different things in 7 years, so, and we're going to get another name soon, I'm sure. We do production, we do post-production, we do ingest, we add metadata, we do licensing. I acquire content from existing programming. We have our own internal image database, as does Warner Brothers. So we have access to all of that content, and none of that has to be licensed. It is all ours. So that kind of leaves a lot of content that Getty or Shutterstock or any one of those would like to license to us, but we own it already. Our client within the company, we have a variety of clients. Obviously, Warner Brothers, their TMZ is their largest editorial user. CNN, obviously. Bleacher Report for sports. Turner Classic Movies. We have a couple of agencies that we use by subscription, and then others that we buy a la carte. HBO documentaries, also a user of editorial content, but they usually work through, and the licensing is done through various production companies rather than directly billed to Warner Brothers. Of course, they're always looking for a Warner Brothers, or excuse me, Warner Media, a discount, so they always want an introduction from me to them, to the agency to see if that discount can apply to Warner Media only productions. And then I also deal with Latin America, who TNT, LatAm, broadcasts all the major award shows, and I acquire all the nominees for Teen Choice, Critics' Choice, Golden Globes, Latin Grammys, what else? Oh, SAG Awards and Oscars. That's fun. Our sources are Getty Images and Shutterstock. Those are 2 of our largest resources for editorial content. Frankly, trusted content is assumed through these 2 companies. iStock and will occasionally be used for editorial content. The Everett Collection, PhotoFest, Alame, MPTV, and then a variety of libraries. My largest client is TCM, but I also acquire images for the variety of films or series that are syndicated on TBS and TNT. So Big Bang Theory and various movies, etc. So I usually go to the studios directly to get those. Now, some people would go directly to Getty Images, but nobody ever thinks to budget for pictures. I don't know why, but they don't. And trying to find the actual buyers or users and get a real sense of the buy for Warner Media is nigh to impossible, mainly because of credit cards being able to be used by designers for layouts, for comps, all of their needs. And then composites are also, we need backgrounds for composites as well. Now, when we get to untrusted content or distrusted or watch out content, Google Images is, for some reason, the go-to source for anybody under the age of 35. And of course, if anybody's tried to tell me when I'm going over. If
You're fine. Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 more minutes.
2 or 3 more minutes. Okay, fine. Trying to find an attribution through those is nigh to impossible, though it is my job to try to find that. I hate Pinterest with a deep loathing. There is rarely...
Tell us how you feel about that.
I don't like them. There's rarely any attribution. Wikipedia, as an example, does as good a job as they can in identifying the source or if something's under public domain. A lot of the times we can use those images because we are using them in an editorial context. But if there's any question outside of those trusted vendors, it goes to legal. Personally, I can't okay anything to be licensed unless it's from these trusted sources. Anything else has to be run through legal. So if it's a picture of an author from a book jacket that is 70 years old or 60 years old, I still have to run that by our legal department. We try to find out who took the picture. We try to get in touch with the publishers, but in 70 years, 60 years, the hands have changed so many times, nobody knows what's going on. So we basically take a calculated risk with those, and it's an acceptable risk because in the 7 years that I've been there, not because it's due to me, but there have been no claims. I think one photographer said we used without licensing, we were able to prove otherwise, and he apologized. And then, let's see, I think that's about it as far as what I have to talk about. But these are some of the, I'll just go through some pictures. These are some of the events that we do. We do AFI, so Denzel Washington gets an award for life achievement. We do the SAG Awards, so all of these images were licensed and composited. They always want to have somebody either looking at the camera or away from the camera or looking like they're having fun on the red carpet, but it's hard to find them. They don't like to have fun on them. We have Turner Classic Movies does a film festival. We work with various vendors for that. We do lots of viewer activities. TCM is probably one of the best brands we've got. It has a rabidly avid fan base, and even not being able to raise Robert Osborne from the dead, they're very picky about who they want talking about their movies. So this is just some of the stuff I did for Turner Latin America. As you can see, these are all HBO properties. In any case, we rely on our vendors to provide us with correct content. On occasion, we might find something wrong as far as the title of a movie, Generally, our vendors have been very receptive to receiving corrections, and those are very few and far between. So thank you for being accurate.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I love the perspective. I think that's a value that we can bring as an industry to buyers is, doing that vetting so that you can feel comfortable making a purchase and knowing that if you're getting it from one of our organizations, the research has been done, and things are cleared and information is accurate. So it's great to know that that's something we're doing well as an industry, it sounds. So finally, I'd like to introduce Lia Jusino. Lia is Director of Archival Research for Vice Media, working across Vice Media or Vice News and other Vice editorial brands. Vice is doing innovative work in the new media space, as well as in cutting-edge editorial areas like user-generated content. And I'll turn it over to Lia to share more of a content producer's take on the editorial market. And this is also Lia's first DMLA, so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, to sort of speak to Eileen's point, Google Images is something very popular at Vice that we have come in as a department to sort of stop everyone from going to as a first line of defense and let them know that, hey, we're here, we're the Archival Research Department, let us help you find the content you need to create your pieces. Archival Department at Vice is sort of it's a complicated department name because we are not Vice's archive, though that's one of the most frequently asked things of me every day. Hey, I need B-roll of this, but can it be Vice B-roll? Or I need photos of this, but do we have any Vice shot photos of that? And I've been at Vice for 4 years, which for Vice years is a very long time, and I am sort of a dinosaur there of their content. But what I was able to sort of do in the past 2 years is start to build up systems for taking our own photos and B-roll and clipping it up. We're selling some of our content on Getty and making it more accessible within our own company so that it can be reused. It's a little complicated with some of the partnerships Vice has, like with HBO, that was HBO's footage, but we're working on that. But in the meantime, we are mostly just a department of seasoned archival researchers trying to contribute to the stories that Vice is telling. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Vice Guide to Vice to give you a sense of the types of stories we're trying to tell. We believe that the world is young at Vice. We think it's a young planet in flux and not an old one in ruin. Our audience is ready to take on the world, and so are we. We hope to empower their voices and their points of view. We believe that telling great stories starts with listening. We believe that a subjective point of view is honest, authentic, and should come from a place of empathy and passion. We bring an open mind to every story at Vice and make space for multiple perspectives to live together. To truly understand something, we want our audience to feel and experience it for themselves. We want to take the audience on the journey with us in the rawest, most human form, whether it be living in the fun, absurd, or tragedy of the world. So the Archival Department at Vice works alongside all of these storytellers, and we also find ways to find the humanity, bring a point of view, and immerse the audience, not just through Vice's lens, but through third-party archival material. Our Archival Department services all 5 lines of business at Vice. We've got Vice News, Vice Land, our cable channel, Vice Studios, who had produced the Fire Festival documentary that you might have seen, someone just speak about earlier, the president of Shutterstock, I'm sorry, yes, I forget his name. And then also Virtue, our branded line of business, which is a little more difficult for our department to help because we are mostly editorial content licensors, and the whole commercial side of things is a different skill set and sort of can of worms that I'm learning more and more about. And then Vice Digital, so our short web pieces that you might see online and social media. I mentioned earlier, we've begun cataloging and clipping our own material to sell on Getty, and we're creating an internal resource with ambitions to have a full Vice Vault archive someday. Our primary functions are to research and to license material, whether it be visual evidence of the past or providing context for a subject. Our archival research is done with careful scrutiny and analysis, and we hold ourselves to the same high editorial integrity standards that our reporters would in the field. While our department services all 5 lines of business at Vice, Vice News is where we work the most with and the most in depth with. For the past 3 years, our archival department has been working with the Vice News Tonight program on long-form documentaries and our digital news web pieces. Our 30-minute nightly news program can have up to 100 different archival cues from third-party vendors. Some of this research we've had days or weeks in advance to do, and some of it was a breaking day turnaround. We couldn't do it without our trusted partners in content. Our audience wants to know not just why this story is important now, but how did we get here, which is where our department gets to come in and sort of give that historical look back in the regions that we're traveling to. When I first got to Vice, I had no experience providing archival material for Day of News. Domestic, international, and Washington, D.C. pool feeds were new for many of us in our department to navigate. But those weren't providing everything we needed. Another increasingly available resource to us is UGC content. Much like traditional newswires, UGC vendors now allow us to get even closer to the stories by directly using the material our own audience could have shot. The archival department and fast-paced were not really synonymous to me when I first got to Vice, and when people came to my desk and assigned me something, I wanted to take weeks or months or years to get to know their topic and provide as much material as I could. But then with our Vice News Tonight program, I only had within days, sometimes even hours, which sometimes narrowed the places I could search and maybe narrowed the scope of research I was able to provide. But again, with UGC-type content and our trusted partners, I was sort of able to still give them something at the end of the day to make air at 7:30 for every program. I'd like to show a clip, it's just a 1-minute reel of Vice News before I go into a 1-minute case study of how our archival department contributed to one of our stories. I hope it's not too loud.
Vice News Tonight is putting out the most premier documentary content. We're not doing stand-ups from the hotel roof. We're getting to the heart of the most pressing stories around the world. And I think that's why it's resonated with our generation, because our generation is creating it.
In terms of privacy as a human right, does that apply to how you do business in China?
In that 1 gram, that's actually 50,000 fatal overdoses.
That's a city.
If the government thought extra security was going to calm protesters down, they were wrong.
You're going to be dead in 2 days.
Yeah?
Have you processed that?
I don't know if I could tell these stories somewhere else, to be honest.
So that reel was 100% Vice shot footage. It was important to me that I had a budget to attend this conference, and I did not have any left over to license material for presentation purposes. So everything that you're seeing is not an example of my research skills. It's what I had available to me that Vice owns. So for a case study, one of our most notable episodes was the Charlottesville Race and Terror episode. And this was, an example of a correspondent who had expertise on this subject and had been following this alt-right group online for months ahead. When the sort of horrific events happened over that weekend, Vice captured a lot of it. But when the team came back from the field, they were asking the archival department, who else was there? Is there any cell phone footage? A car rammed into a group of counter-protesters, and Vice had some of that material and had interviews afterwards with people who had witnessed it, but really being able to sew together 3 or 4 UGC videos alongside of that, I think provided a 360 view of those events for that day, and I was really proud that our archival department also got to work on that piece, and really we have a way to sort of help out all of the stories that Vice is telling. Yeah, and so I'm based in New York. I know that there's a Vice office down the road from here. I've never been to it. I hear they get to bring their dogs. I'm very jealous. But yeah, I'm based in the Williamsburg office, and if anyone has questions, let me know. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And if anybody hasn't seen the Charlottesville episode, it's really powerful and something definitely to watch. Okay, so the conference is running a little bit late, so we have about 20 minutes left still. I'm going to go into a couple of questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions too. So we'll start with you, Bob. You've worked with Getty Images for over 20 years through a time of major shifts in the stock media and publishing industries. How has editorial stock market changed during your tenure, and what changes do you see ahead?
Gosh, I think just about everything's changed, Tom, frankly. Well, some things don't. Amount of customers, I think the appetite from an historical perspective, and I mean historical content, I think that appetite is not exponentially growing, but I think to the point earlier, context is all, and I think particularly perhaps in the last 2-3 years, even the veracity of a picture becomes even more important. In providing context, I think the ease which we can access archives our expectations around accessing archives, certainly, whether it is all online or not online or none of it's online, people want to see it all. And I think that's kind of always been there. I think, picture researchers and photo editors, they always want to see everything in that, but I think never more so than now. It's like, what else do you have? What else do you have? So that does kind of drive us to thinking, well, before we may have edited our own archives quite tightly, we would pride ourselves on, we know how to edit a picture. We know what our customers want. We know, and we're very well informed about that. We have good DNA. But I think increasingly over the last sort of 5-10 years, that's become more difficult to target in a granular sense, in that we have so many more customers in so many more territories with so many different agendas. It kind of frees you up a little bit to give you a little bit more latitude in how you reapproach your own physical archives and how you decide what to put into the marketplace. But I think it's kind of a contradiction. I think that the news cycle obviously is so perishable. It's here, it's gone. Yet the appetite for historical actually has become extended, and I think that's obviously great news for an archive. But people, I think, and without getting too political, I think perhaps in very recent times where we see some sort of turbulence in the political climate, you get people looking back, and that's great news for an archive. They may use it really kind of inappropriately as shorthand, if everyone's a bit worried, suddenly you see 50s families all around a TV and all this kind of, rose-coloured tinted stuff. Not necessarily true history. I don't care as much in the licensing it. I do care, obviously. But, on the other side of that, you have the context, real context and giving real depth and analysis into actually what is happening today. And that is only growing. Obviously, the volumes are up and prices are slightly down, etc. But I think overall, that appetite, I've never seen anything like it. And it's how we've managed to grow our business so markedly in the last sort of 5-6 years. It's been rather astonishing.
Yeah, I think it's great to see that there's still that growth in the space, and that's what we want to highlight with the theme of, navigating disruption. Disruption isn't only negative; it can also highlight these new opportunities in areas of our market that are areas of the industry overall that are still in this sort of growth phase.
I think it is, and I think what you see, it's certainly in the corporate and agency space, who not increasingly turn to archive, but that appetite, whether they're jumping on bandwagons or what, that's for history to decide. But they want to use authentic, trusted content, authentic content, whatever you want to call it. And it is real people, history. These archives are real people doing real things. This is not pre-shot stuff. This is the real deal. And I think people, buyers certainly are seeing the value in that. And I know how stock's changing and how our creative teams approach that. They've been doing that for a long time about, authentic content. But history, you can't reshoot it. It's there, and I think it's there to be used appropriately in that space.
Thank you. So I think, that's a good segue into a question on the buyer side. For Eileen, when you're licensing materials, where are you looking for this kind of content? What websites and agencies or different services do you use, and what drives the choice of one agency versus another? I think that can inform people here who obviously represent many different chunks of that industry.
Well, I think I mentioned many of the vendors that we use, or at least a handful of them, Getty being one, but essentially we also go to our own internal database because of the purchase of the MGM library that occurred, 15, 20 years ago. So we have a lot of material there, but the usual Getty, Shutterstock. We rely on Everett and PhotoFest tremendously for stills and art from old films. And mainly because I've been working with the people that sell to me, I have a high sense of trust in what is going to be given to me. As far as how I choose and where I go, it depends upon the budget, which is usually nothing. So What we've done is we have subscription agreements with those 4 vendors. I know what it's going to cost depending upon the agreement, and again, I can trust those. Those are my go-to, and then from then on, it's pretty much a la carte licensing, depending upon the subject, depending upon where I can find it. And that's pretty much it.
Great, thank you. And then for Lia, obviously there's concerns about doctored content. The world is it's getting easier to produce materials, and we've talked a little bit about that in different contexts here and also in some of the other panels. But I'm wondering, how do you go about verifying UGC in particular, and what are some best practices that others in the industry can follow if they want to integrate UGC into their own productions or their own libraries?
Yeah, so for us, it's very important to work with trusted vendors. So Storyful, Jukin, Newsflare, these are places who do the verification for us. And I rely heavily on them to do so because our department is already overstretched in finding all this content for tonight's show very quickly, and then filling out our cue sheets and our licenses. So we lean on them a lot, but more and more I'm seeing that they're offering services to integrate. Maybe it's like a little plug-in, so if I'm watching something on YouTube, for example, Storyful has a little green dot that can light up if Storyful has verified this content. Additionally, I can send a vendor like Storyful content for them to verify for us that maybe they haven't already done for another client. But that's what's been really important for us. I'm not expecting our team of archival researchers to be verifying that content in real time, only because the pacing of our programming could change so quickly that it's been so helpful to have experts already in the field that we can rely on to do so for us.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then finally, Jonathan, I think there's some people who are already in this space, and maybe there's others who see their business going in the direction of bringing in more editorial content. And I'm wondering, since you do work with a lot of contributors, how do you recruit those contributors? And where do you find that there's differences in the skill sets for a news photographer versus those working more in the creative space?
There you go. Okay, so so how do we recruit? So and the skill set.
Yeah.
First, I'll answer 2 questions that weren't asked. Number one, a little bit I think it's maybe Bob's point. More photography is being licensed today than ever before. The appetite for photography is insatiable. So I think in the DMLA conference today, that's a great thing. That's really good news. I mean, more photography is being consumed today than ever before, with more and more outlets to use photography. So the need for trusted content is greater than ever. That's a great thing. Fortunately, the slice of the pie is getting very, very small, almost to the point I'm not sure we can keep, measuring the slice of the pie. So that's a great thing. As far as, so how do we recruit and the skill set, much different from, and I think also, when I was involved with DMLA before, when it was PACA and before, it was a lot of editorial agencies looking to kind of move into the commercial space, which proved to be very difficult because editorial photography is quite a bit different than commercial photography. And I think the reverse may be true as well. And to answer the question is how to recruit, this photo, for example, was taken in Hong Kong during the protests, and I'm not sure if you can see, but the photographer is literally facing down the barrel of a gun from this policeman. There was a shooting where a protester was shot with some rubber bullets. Fortunately, it was rubber bullets a few weeks ago. This photographer happened to be either, and the answer to the question is you have to be at the right place at the wrong time or the wrong place at the right time. And that's not something that you can calculate. I mean, you can try to figure it out as best you can. You have to use your journalistic skills, and that's really how we recruit people. You have to use some journalistic skills, and not only do you have to take great pictures, but you got to deliver them very, very quickly, because not only is Lia on deadline, but we have customers all over the world. And particularly, for example, in the entertainment world, we're covering things here in LA. In Europe, where a lot of the pictures are used, it's a 9-hour time difference. Already you're behind. So we're always on deadline, always on deadline. And to tell a photographer, listen, that's great stuff, but we need it really now. And sometimes it's very difficult. So there are a lot of other skills involved than just the photography. You have to have great captions. I tell photographers, you know, it's great to take great pictures and it's fantastic, but you'll never find them again if there's not great metadata. You need to have metadata. You can't do if we knew a little bit more about this photo and had a little bit more detail in the metadata, it makes the picture so much more valuable. Technically, as we go back, we look back 10 years. Maybe we're going to go back to some Hong Kong protests, and we know that this person happened to really kind of the whole, you know, this particular policeman. So that's really important, and those skills you really have to kind of learn in the field. And unfortunately, I think a lot of students coming out of photography or journal, those kind of skills that are learned like in the field, or should be learned, they're not, you know, they're bringing great technical skills. They can do video, they can do audio, but those basic, you know, who, what, where, when, why things are happening, sometimes are not as important as people think. And it is important. Those old kind of caption skills, you got to spell the name right. You know, sometimes I see like literally like hundreds of photos with a step and repeat where navigating is spelled wrong. How can that be? You took 4,000 photos with a backdrop that says navigating and you spelled it wrong in your caption. Things like that we need to know, right? We need to know when it was taken, where it was taken, and who's in the picture. So, and I just want to, if I can just move to a couple of that I mentioned earlier about the trusted content. This photo cannot be trusted. Let me go back there if I can go back there for a second. This photo, the moon, now the moon wasn't placed there. The moon was there, but the photographer used an in-camera double exposure, which didn't, and we were not aware of that. The photo was distributed, and a customer questioned the authenticity of the photo. Now, it wasn't added in there. The moon was there that night. It was just that there was some manipulation. This photo of Biles, the gymnast, this photographer actually did add in the special instructions in the caption field of the metadata that this was a multiple exposure. And that was enough information for the editor, for somebody, a picture buyer, to say, okay, this is, you know, there's some manipulation here, or there's some, I wouldn't say necessarily altering, but it was enough warning that, you know, the picture buyer could decide whether that was right for them or not. This didn't, this one didn't contain any information, and the customer felt that was sort of like, that wasn't really fair, exactly, right? How it looked, yeah. So we're really careful about not to use pictures like this. Yeah.
Content that is scarce in many cases, right? It's a real event or person. It's not something that can be found or repeated. And I'm curious if you're seeing, I noticed that a couple of people said prices are down. I would expect that at some point that's going to turn around, and where, because of the scarcity of what you have, that prices are going to go up. But I suspect it's also competing with that need to change images all the time and budgets that can't really support it. So I'm just curious if you guys have thoughts on that.
If I can just, I think when you said about changing all the time, when it was only print media and a customer, a buyer, committed to using a photo, they were committing to use that photo. That was going to be in print for a million editions of them, and that was it. But now, because content can be, you know, swapped out in 3 seconds, hey, Jonathan, can we use this picture? No, yes, it's back and forth. We'll move on. You know, it just, and so I think the ability to sort of, the commitment level to use the photo is sort of, it's not as permanent as it used to be, and therefore I think the price reflects in that. That's just my opinion. And of course, there's a lot more being used. You know, Time magazine would publish 60 or 70 photos a week. Now, you know, CNN.com is 60, 70 pictures a minute. I mean, so, you know, unfortunately, I think that's kind of the reality, right? I mean,
yeah.
What's next? I was going to say, yeah, if anyone else wants to speak to that, I don't know if Bob or Eileen on the buyer side or the sort of, you know, big picture of the market side.
We're fairly democratic about pricing. It is what it is, and I think sometimes I would love to see prices go up, obviously. But I'm not sure we're going to put the genie back in the bottle, but nor do we really want to. I think it's about relevancy. You know, that picture that we may have uncovered in the archive that we think is incredibly rare and is a wonderful contextual piece in history. You know, it could be a 19th century picture of a snapshot of Black Britain is incredibly rare and has changed that narrative, in fact, of history. We don't charge any more or less than a picture of a press call that, you know, 3,000 photographers could have been at. So I think it's about relevancy for your project, and everyone has obviously a different take on that. So I think it would be, you know, very difficult. But, you know, we do have some premium collections that we perhaps ask people to pay a little bit more for. You know, we're obliged to certain partners, and of course every partner thinks they have wonderful and unique content, and often they do. But where it's actually rare, you know, perhaps there is a case for that. But ultimately, I think it's about you put those raw materials in the marketplace, and I think the market decides what's relevant and what kind of quality threshold they need for their project. And that's not really a price fee-based decision.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, you know, I think one thing I'm hearing across the board,
Can I just speak to the metadata point one more time?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I've observed in the past few years, I guess, sometimes when other companies are acquiring new collections, we might be losing some of the metadata, and sometimes people on my team have found photos or videos where it was very clear this collection was sort of uploaded in a rush to get it there because it's exciting that it's there, and now I've lost the date or I've lost a solid caption. And while we have a hunch and a sense that, oh, you know, I sort of remember this when it was on Corvus, not actually having that metadata has made sometimes our producers and our lawyers not allow us to use the photo. And I guess that would be one thing I would sort of hope to see more of, more preservation of metadata as well, alongside, of course, producing more content and making it readily available, but also keeping that metadata, because it is, so it can make or break, you know, if you're going to buy it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've been with companies as they've ingested large collections, and it really is a matter of expediency and cost for them. And less so is the accuracy. So, for example, there's a website with, I would say, several thousand images taken in the 20th century that are all dated 1900. And I take a look at that and I realize, okay, I'm gonna have to, if I want to use it, I have to do a little more research myself in order to do that. And then the other issue, as far as jumping back to price, is the editorial content or editorial projects have never been funded the same way as commercial. And Getty and Shutterstock both started as commercial. They've acquired editorial content, and it is, I don't want to say it's unimportant, but it has less value in the marketplace. So I have to think about what value the company puts on it. Now, as Bob said, his sales for archival content have increased, and I noticed we do, CNN did this 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and aughts, and they use quite a bit of material for that. But the demographic age is changing. I can't tell you how many people are unaware of what D-Day was that I work with. So, you know, the population is changing. Boomers are dying out, believe it or not. And as that happens, the market's going to change as well. People won't care about World War I, say, in 25 years. I'll be dead.
If I can also just add that the other what we sometimes, the contributors, and when we report back some of the pricing that we're all familiar with, you know, they're a bit shocked sometimes. But one thing that we provide to our customers is not only the photography, excuse me, but we provide a service to deliver it in an organized manner, an efficient manner that respects that the metadata, et cetera. That's a huge value, and sometimes customers, it may not be quote unquote the best picture, but they can find it, it's trustworthy metadata, it's trustworthy photo. That's a huge, that is perhaps underestimated. I'm not sure, I'm not on the buyer side, but I would imagine that's a very, very valuable thing to have. And to be organized in a way that customers can find it. It's one thing to have the great photo, but if you can't find it online, and the other thing I can add is on the trusted content, some of the biggest blunders in sort of, photography that's not been true or accurate, it's been by professionals, professional companies, our colleagues. User-generated content, there's little upside to kind of forging something. Right? But for the professional who wants to make that moon a little bit bigger or make this a little darker, there's more incentive, there's financial incentives. So I think we as professionals need to be, more vigilant about that and protecting that, because at the end of the day, that's a big thing that the buyers, that they just told us that they deal with companies because it's trusted. And if we violate that trust, that's going to be a big issue for us.
Yeah, I think you summarized perfectly what I would take away from this panel, which is that we're not just providers of content, we're also stewards of that content. And part of the service we provide to people doing the production side or the buyer side is that curation and that trusted, sort of stewardship of the content. So definitely something where I think that's a value we add. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here.